Hello everybody, my name is Dratnus, and welcome to a bit more of a kind of fun video, less informative or whatever than usual. This one is top 7 trinkets since Legion. We're gonna do since Legion, since that's when I kind of started playing. I've played on and off since like 2.1, but I missed a lot of patches and didn't raid super hardcore in many patches up until 7.0, and I've been playing since then pretty consistently. So I figured that would be a point to start. So no soul capacitor or the reforger trinket or any of the other stuff like that. That's all not in the scope of this video. We're gonna take a look though at basically every PvE trinket from, so not the, I guess you remember Maledict. We're also not doing Maledict in this one. And the criteria for making it onto this list is kind of murky, kind of just whatever I say. So you may disagree very much with things here. I am going to do some honorable mentions at the end as well, but let's start off with number 7. And number 7 is actually going to be a stat stick trinket. This is a type of item that has gone in and out of favor across the years, and has often been very good. Back in Legion, stat sticks were very good. A lot of people used them. They kind of stopped making good stat sticks for a while. This expansion, we again have seen stuff like Whispering Incarnate Icon, Ominous Chromatic Essence become really popular and powerful. But to me, the most iconic of the trinkets, not icon, but iconic, is Unstable Arcano Crystals. So this is my number 7. This trinket was a stat stick with no primary stat, but all 4 secondary stats that came back in Legion. And this dropped from a world boss from Withered Gym, which was a world boss that was up like once every 8 weeks. And every single time Withered Gym was up, everybody would fly and try and get this trinket at the start of the expansion. And then later in the expansion, there were trinket re-rolling things you could do with like world currency, and you would just spam reroll until you got, a relinquished Arcano Crystal, and then you would keep spam rerolling to try and get a nice Titan Forged one. This one, it actually scaled very poorly with item level as well, so it was really good at the start of the expansion, and it was still good in later part of the expansion, but it was not super important to get it like Titan Forged or whatever. Even if you just got it at base Withered Gym eye level, that thing would be very good throughout the first half of the expansion, and people used this all through the expansion once they could get their hands on those relinquished versions. So to me, this is kind of the iconic stat stick item, and it had a fun story being from a world boss. All right, at number 6, we're going to have a healer trinket. Healer trinkets are not something that are making up much of the rest of this list. There have been some cool ones they've made, though. There's the one from Tumasar Garrus that like put a hot on somebody, and then if they got low health, it would consume. There was the cheat death one from Sun King Salvation, the Tuft, which was pretty cool. But the one that I have actually is a legendary trinket in number 6, Velen's Future Sight. This effect was pretty cool. So this was a legendary from Legion that was added in patch 7.1.5 and could drop for any healer spec. And what it did was it was an on-use that increased all healing done and also caused half of the overhealing you did to be redistributed to nearby injured players, which is a really powerful and cool effect that they put on this trinket, and I think was it was really nifty, because overhealing is often, it's so bad, right, when you overheal, especially if you overheal and there are still people in danger. But the combination of Velen's Future Sight plus big healer cooldowns would often just top the whole raid in a really, really powerful way. So that is going to be my number 6. Little shout out to the healers. That's the last time we will see a dedicated healer trinket on this list, though. As we move on to number 5, we're going to see the only Dragonflight entrance on our list here. That's not to say Dragonflight doesn't have cool trinkets. We haven't had enough time to play with the ones this tier for me to include them in this list, so I haven't included any or really even considered any of the Aberrus trinkets for here. But we are going to include an item from Vault of the Incarnates. This was an item that combined power and flavor and trolling as well a little bit. This item is Manic Grief Torch. So Manic Grief Torch, an Agir Strength trinket. And of course, this one you may be more familiar with if you've missed the last couple expansions that started playing now. This is the one where you just shoot out the fire, and it's a 2-minute cooldown. It does a boatload of damage, which part of the reason these trinkets are on this list, a lot of them were overpowered or very good. because those are the trinkets we played with a lot. And for me, it's hard to unentangle that from the like coolness side of things. You know, Manic Grief Torch, if it did half as much damage as it did, nobody would ever use it. It wouldn't be interesting. It wouldn't be on this list. And if it did, so the fact that it does a lot of damage is part of the reason it's here. And I'm not trying to like unentangle that from this ranking. But yeah, this thing was really powerful. It was a 2-minute cooldown, and then whenever an allied player died, its cooldown would get reduced, which was it was good for progression. You know, you'd get some pre-proc sometimes when people died, and oftentimes, like if you had a DPS check on like an ad or something that you needed to kill, the case where you would fail would be, oh, somebody died, we lost damage. But Grief Torch actually kind of helped close that gap, because somebody would die and then you'd gain damage briefly off of everybody getting an extra Grief Torch on the target. So that was pretty cool. And then also this enabled some nice trolling with the famous weak aura, thank you for resetting my Manic Grief Torch, which whispered players and thanked them whenever they helped increase your DPS in that fashion. So very cool trinket. Up in 4th, we are going to have the only tank trinket on this list. There's been a lot of good tank trinkets over the years, defensive tank trinkets. Some have been on you, some have shielded you, stuff like Blood Spattered Scale, a dungeon trinket from the other side, just press button, get big shield, very powerful. Stuff like Diamond Laced Refracting Prism from Battle of Dazarlor, that would just kind of give you health. Bloodthirsty Urchin as well from from what was it, Eternal Palace, that would also have a effect that basically just gave you some passive healing. But in number 4, we're actually going to have a Cheat Death trinket. So this is a type of trinket they make, it seems like once every other raid tier we've seen them, although there haven't really been any on this level in Dragonflight so far, so maybe they're moving away from them. This is a very powerful type of effect. There's been a lot of cool ones. A lot of them will proc, and then there's stuff like the Royal Dagger hilt that would give you damage over time until, afterwards. There was Bwansamdi's Bargain that would save you, but then give you a big heal absorb. There was Weave of Warped Fates that would just basically just cheat death and save you. But the coolest one, in my opinion, was the Splintered Heart of Alar. This is also, again, has some element of troll to it. Maybe that's something that this and Grief Torch have in common, and they're both on this list as a result, perhaps. But Splintered Heart of Alar would proc, and it would save you from a lethal attack. Then when it happened, you would also explode in a burst of damage, dealing damage to nearby enemies and allies, and also recovering some health. So the you could kill your friends if you were a tank, you were wearing this trinket. This happened to me on like Stone Legion General's progression. Splintered Heart of Alar procced and killed my healer that was standing on top of me, and it's really funny when that happens. Really troll trinket, but also really powerful and cool. So yeah, that's on my list. It's one of my favorite trinkets. All right, in 3rd place, we're moving on to sort of raw power. This trinket was extremely good. It was extremely good for a lot of specs, and it was also a trinket that changed how your spec felt to play. I'm talking about a trinket from the Nighthold, Convergence of Fates. This is an agility or strength trinket that said your attacks have a chance to reduce the remaining cooldown on one of your powerful abilities by 3 seconds. I think it used to be 5 as well. I think this ended up taking a nerf. So you can see it's like Empower Rune Weapon for Frost DK, Berserk for Feral Druid, True Shot for Hunter. So with this trinket, you would get huge amounts of cooldown reduction on your major CD. It would let you move it around, put it in different places, but also just press it a lot more times per fight. This ended up being really powerful for a lot of the specs here. There was a lot of, this is a push trinket. They put a lot of power into it, and it was really fun as well. Pressing your major cooldown is really fun. You got to do a lot of damage. You got to, most specs feel the most fun to play in their major cooldown because a lot of them make the specs resources feel better, in addition to buffing the damage of their abilities. So Convergence of Fates was strong and also fun. It was one that didn't have power in some kind of trinket proc or on use or something like that. It just made your spec. It greased the cogs and the wheels of your specs internal workings, and it depended on your spec. Some specs wouldn't get too much value out of this, right? Depending on which spec you're playing. Oh wow, look, kind of broken wowhead here. Look at these. I've checked one of these checkboxes has appeared down here. I don't think it's used to having this many scroll effects. Anyways, that's Convergence of Fates. That is number 3 on the my favorite trinkets list thing. I still have no idea what the title is going to be here, so We'll see. Number 2. So this was a extremely powerful trinket. Unbelievably powerful trinket that was still sought after the tier after it came out by mostly one spec, but a couple others would still use it as well. It was iconic. It warped sort of the game around it for a while when this existed as well. It was one of 6 Infinity Stones that Fire Mage had in Nyalotha that made that spec so unbelievably powerful. I'm talking about, of course, Azshara's Font of Power. So this was a 2-minute cooldown. You would click the trinket and you would just throw your hands in the air and go like, whoa, and you start channeling power. Every second you channeled power, you would get more duration of this buff, and this buff would give you an absolute boatload of primary stat. So that in and of itself was pretty strong for any kind of cooldown-based spec, but it was especially strong for specs that were hyper-focused on dealing damage in their cooldowns, because it lasted 30 seconds, and actually the buff lasted 30 seconds, but you channeled for 4 seconds, so it lasted for, like, after you press the trinket, 34 seconds later you would lose the buff, which means Azshara's Font of Power only put your other trinket on cooldown for 20 seconds. So you would have 14 seconds after Azshara's Font of Power had been used, or 20 seconds after Azshara's Font of Power had been used, you'd have 14 seconds left of the buff, and at that time, you could press your other trinket, and if you pressed your other trinket, you'd have both trinket effects rolling at the same time, which made double on use a really, really powerful pattern for specs that had really, really heavily cooldown focused damage. Turns out Fire Mage was a great example of that. You'd play Azshara's Font of Power, you'd play a badge, you'd get your Hyper Thread wrist wraps from Mechagon, you would get your 3 Blaster Master Azurites, you'd get Infinity Masterful Corruptions, and you would just deal unbelievable amounts of damage in your combustion. They're just huge, huge damage, thanks to Azshara's Font of Power, giving you a huge amount of stat in and of itself, and also having that secret superpower of being combinable with another trinket, which most trinkets aren't. These days, actually, they've kind of tried to avoid this with, you can see the puzzle box, Algathar puzzle box. They nerfed that by making it a 30-second buff, and then they were like, oh, hang on, this enables double on use, so they made it put your other trinket on a 30-second cooldown instead of 20, because they don't like double on use in that sense. They don't like us stacking 2 trinkets. They don't mind us having 2 on use trinkets, but they don't want us using them multiplied together with each other, like how Azshara's Font of Power was being used. But yeah, this thing was iconic. It did lead to the era of 20-second pull timers. You had to do a 20-second pull timer because the mage needed to press their Font of Power at like 18 seconds pre-pull, so that they could press their second trinket, 2 globals into the pull or whatever. So that was a little bit of a cringe side of it. Fonting in dungeons as well was often sketchy as well. You would see the mage fonting, and then you'd know, all right, as the tank, if I don't pull multiple packs in the next 10 seconds, my mage is going to do it for me. And you'd see them just blinking around, tagging a bunch of packs, running back to the tank and being like, look, I can't help it. I've got font rolling. So, yeah. Number 2, very iconic trinket. It did mostly land on the Fire Mages in Season 4 of BFA, but it was good for a lot of other specs as well, especially back in Season 3 when it was, still current eye level. Another cringe part of it was going and farming it if you actually did need it, especially if you rolled a Fire Mage that season. Fire Mage was so good, and then if you looked at it and you were like, oh, I gotta go to Mechagon to get my bracers, I gotta go back to the old raid to get my trinket, I gotta farm up Lucid Dreams, I've got a huge shopping list to get these 6 Infinity Stones to make my spec do huge damage. So that part was cringe. The trinket, however, was still awesome and extremely powerful. And finally, you may have been seeing, as I've been hiding the main screen here, the character in the background that's been giving a little bit of a hint to what my number 1 is going to be. There's certainly some bias here, because this was one of my first rating tiers since I kind of started in Legion, rating super hardcore. The number 1 trinket is Draft of Souls. This was a trinket that dropped from Gul'dan. You would press the button, and it was sort of like Manic Grief Torch, but you had to be up close and personal next to your target. You would channel for a little bit. Also, unlike Manic Grief Torch, you couldn't do anything to stop yourself in the middle of it. If you pressed Draft of Souls, you were going. It rooted you to the ground, and it made you go all big and angry and start just doing a huge barrage of shadow damage to a random nearby enemy. So it was really good on single target and didn't really scale into AoE all that much. And this trinket was extremely cool and extremely powerful. There was a lot of stuff going on with it. Oh, this is not actually a flying mount. This was that was a stylistic Legion mount, because I'm in my Legion Mog as well, but I forgot it wasn't actually a dragon riding mount. It will be soon, I guess. But I've got my old Draft of Souls. I pulled it out of the bank because, of course, can't delete this thing. I'll show you guys what it looked like. And you would actually go and you would stack all of your buffs with it as well. You'd want to make sure you were enraged and you had your Frothing Berserker, and you'd press Draft of Souls and you just go, do this huge shadow barrage of damage. And if you look at my damage here, it doesn't do too much damage compared to Dragonflight items and auto attacks and stuff. But back in the day, this would have been, like Grief Torch or more levels of top damage when you pressed it. It's fallen a little bit here, but yeah, I guess it hit on average for 98 damage each time there. I guess there's been a couple of number squishes since Legion, but back in the day, that would be millions. And that thing was extremely cool. It had a lot of cool stuff going on for it as well. As I said, it stacked with various effects, such as Unholy DK Mastery, Fury Warrior Frothing Berserker, Enrage, Arms Warrior Colossus Smash, all kinds of stuff that would amp its damage. And it also rooted you for the duration, which could be useful on fights like Gul'dan. You actually could use it. There was a part in the fight where you'd get random people would get knocked away and would have to, break their chains on them or something that they would have to break, and you could, you could move your opener a couple of seconds later and then be in your Draft of Souls when that was happening, so that if it targeted you, it wouldn't knock you back, and that was also really cool. But mostly this trinket was just so much damage, and it was really, really fun, really iconic. I didn't actually get one until fairly late into that patch, but it was still so cool once I got it. It was such a powerful trinket. So that's my number one. You may disagree. You may like one of the other trinkets or an unnamed trinket. However, I do want to briefly go through some honorable mentions. As you may have noticed, we didn't really do any dungeon trinkets. The closest that came was mentioning Blood-Spattered Scale, which is definitely a cool one. The Blood-Spattered, let's see, Spattered. Yeah, this one from Hakar in The Other Side, which is definitely cool. There have been some cool dungeon trinkets, but they tend to be tuned a little bit less aggressively than the raid trinkets, and they also tend to have a little bit less flashy effects, be a little bit more straightforward. I do want to name some cool trinkets that have come from dungeons that are honorable mentions for me, though, such as there was so this one is not even really an M+ trinket, but there was the pocket-sized computation device, which was a trinket that came from Mechagon, and you could socket in different punch cards. Usually you would just socket in Cyclotronic Blast and just zap people for big amounts of damage, and it was just an on-use, blast for damage. Although it did have some other effects as well. Sometimes you'd socket in Dodge Chance on Necrotic Week if you were a tank, and take a little bit less stacks. So that was kind of a cool dungeon trinket. It had a cool effect with, getting the punch cards and putting them in, although it was also kind of annoying to farm and set up. Other cool dungeon trinkets. Another The Other Side trinket, actually, I think that was cool, was Inscrutable Quantum Device. You may disagree with this. Some people don't like this one. But this was a on-use trinket that its ability had a 3-minute cooldown and was question mark, question mark, question mark. And this actually had a long list of different effects that would trigger based on what you were doing with it. For instance, if you were a non-tank player and you had aggro, when you press this, it would summon like a little target dummy, I think. If the target was low on health, it would do some like execute damage to them. It would do some damage. If you had a healer nearby that was low on mana, it would give them mana. That was awful. I hated that part about the trinket. You would try and use it for damage, and it would just give your healer mana. And then if you could manage to avoid having any of the other effects triggered, it would give you a bunch of stats, which was it would give you like one of your 2 highest stats. Which was the main use that you were going for, and you were trying to avoid it doing any of the other stuff. But it would also like break you out of CCs if you used it when CC'd, which was nifty. And I think the use question mark, question mark, question mark part of it is cool. I think in WoW there's a lot of tool tipping is like they write numbers, but they're vague and they don't explain how they work, and it's just like I wish the tool tipping was a little bit more. Did a better job of explaining what it was trying to explain. But if it's not trying to explain it, like if there's a one item that is intentionally like, yep, this is inscrutable, right? What does it do? Who knows? Obviously, you're going to look it up. You're going to look up the table. You're going to learn what it does. But I actually think that's really cool. I still think they should be clearer and have better tool tipping of a lot of other stuff. But this one item I thought was pretty cool. Another dungeon trinket that I want to give an honorable mention to as well is actually the Time Breaching Talon, which is another Dragonflight trinket. This one's from Old Man Legacy of Tyr. This one gives you haste on, or it's a haste trinket and gives you primary stat on use, but it has this cool effect that's thematic to the boss. And most dungeon trinkets since Legion have been thematic to the boss or dungeon they've been dropping from. But this one I thought was especially cool, where you would steal power from your future self, giving a bunch of your stat to yourself now, and then losing it later, which of course is very good with a lot of cooldown effects. Another final one that I want to mention from dungeons is Memento of Anger Boda. This was a Mauve Souls trinket that was just Strength or Agi, and then you would have a chance to get a random stat proc, but also you would get them when people died too, which was flavorful, a cool way to make this kind of, because this was, underworld themed before, I guess, Shadowlands was super thematic, but back when it was like Hell, Herja's place or whatever, I forget what that's called, Helheim or something? I don't know what it's called, but either way, that was a cool trinket. All right, another type of honorable mention I want to do. I quickly want to mention Voidstone. This was a cool trinket. It almost was number 8 on this list, but I decided to just do number 7 and give it a honorable mention instead. For no particular reason, I can't defend the decision. Again, a lot of subjectivity coming in this video. But this was a cool trinket. It was an int trinket. I guess this was also a healer trinket, so another healer trinket. Hey, healers, you're going to get 2 healer trinkets mentioned in this video, so be happy, healers. That's more than you usually get. But this one was cool because it was on theme with the whole of Crucible of Storms, which was this theme of like greatness or power, but at a cost, right? Drawbacks on items. This whole raid actually had a bunch of items, not even necessarily trinkets, that would have upside and downside on them, right? Like, oh, if your target has lower health than you, your abilities have a chance to sacrifice your own health to deal damage, right? Or, oh, open a fissure to the void beneath you, increasing your haste, but if you move out of the fissure, it deals damage to you, right? And these aren't even trinkets. These have trinket effects on other stuff. But Voidstone to me was kind of emblematic of this as well, which this is an on-use 2-minute cooldown that would give your target a massive shield. Friendly target. But it would also absorb healing. So you put this on your tank. If you put this on your tank and they were at like 30% HP and they were about to Death Strike or Ward of Glory or Lay on Hands themselves, then instead they Lay on Hands through the Healing Absorb shield and then they die because they're still at 30% health under the Healing Absorb. So you needed to use this carefully. You needed to use this right before damage would come out on somebody that you wanted to save them from. But it was really powerful. It was a huge... I mean, if you got this to only apply to the damage that was incoming, it was well over budget and extremely cool. So the whole theme of Crucible of Storms I liked a lot. All of these kind of effects that had some positive, some negative to them. This little Kiss Curse theme, which... There's a little bit of that coming with some of the Void-themed items, or that is on some of the Void-themed items from Aberrus as well, right? We've got them with... Like, even the cloak from the end boss has a little bit of that, although it's stealing from your allies. Although it also doesn't have, it doesn't have stamina on it as well, so it's kind of on theme as well. So maybe as we move to Void, if we move towards Void as a theme of, either future raids or future expansions, maybe we'll get some more of that, which I am definitely looking forward to. All right, another honorable mention for me actually comes to several trinkets from the Eternal Palace raid. I already mentioned one of them, but there was this whole cycle of trinkets from that raid that I actually thought were really cool, really well designed, really interesting, such as Ashvane's Razor Coral, which was a Strength Agi trinket that, on use, did damage and applied a Razor Coral to your target, which let you then start stacking Razor Corals on them. And then when you reactivated it, you would yank them all out and get a bunch of crit per stack. So this had a lot of interesting interesting gameplay where it was like, oh, do you want to keep stacking this or do you want to yank them out? Obviously, you'd yank them out with your cooldowns usually, but still there was some cool thinking to it and you'd use it slightly differently on different encounters. Bloodthirsty Urchin, as I mentioned, was a tank trinket that was very powerful and flavorful as well. And then there was also the Ink Pod from here that I thought was really cool, which is another Strength Agi trinket. You'll notice a lot of these are Strength Agi trinkets. I've played Strength Agi for a lot of a lot of my time in this game, much more than like int. So you may see a bias in this list towards those things. Again, not trying to avoid that. Well, I tried a little bit to mention some other ones, but I'm not gonna go super far out of my way to avoid that. But Dribbling Ink Pod was really cool. It was your damaging abilities against enemies above 30% health had a high chance to apply Conductive Ink. And then when they dropped below 30% health, Conductive Ink deals damage per stack. It's actually similar to the, I'm pretty sure there's an Arms Warrior effect that does that right now for like in Aberrus that they can get as well. But this was a really cool effect because it had this interesting gameplay to it where it's like, oh, are you fighting a boss where, first of all, it just did pretty good damage overall. So if you just wanted good overall damage, it could be fine for that. Second of all, it had this interesting effect of like, oh, you want to try and make sure you're in your cooldowns if they interact with it, right? Like if you can get cooldowns that are going to increase your crit or whatever, or increase the target's damage taken from you if those scaled your trinket damage, which, you know, historically a lot of them did more than they do now. These days they make a lot of trinkets kind of not get affected by your class's damage scaling, but so you'd have this one mini game which was like, hey, I want to try and make sure that my my ink pod pops when I'm in my cooldowns. And then the second one was that it created an interesting effect on whether you wanted to use this on a certain fight or not, because if there was a fight that if damage was relevant from 35 to 0, ink pod was sick because all of the damage it dealt during the fight was dealt at 30% health. And so you would just get value in the 35 to 0 burn for the whole damage that you dealt from 100 to 35, which was really, really sweet. But if the important part of the fight was from 20 to 0, then this trinket would suck because it didn't help at all in that range, right? It was a trinket that didn't have any value within that damage range. So it really mattered on the fight whether or not the part that you cared about started at 100, in which case it was good if the trinket was just good for your class, 35, in which case you should make some sacrifices to play for this trinket, or 20, in which case you should only play it if it's like really, really good overall, right? So really, really cool little bit of gaming that came in with the Dribbling Ink Pod. All right, final honorable mention. We've done a bunch of raid trinkets, mostly raid trinkets, threw out some honorable mentions to a few dungeon trinkets. There are a lot of cool-ish dungeon trinkets, but the final honorable mention of this video is going to go to a World Quest trinket. That's right. This one is also an early Legion trinket, you may remember. The Devilsaur Shock Baton. This trinket was actually really over budget, and whenever there were a lot of specs that was like, ooh, is there a World Quest up right now that rewards a Devilsaur Shock Baton? Because if so, I can go and grab that, and that will be good for me for a while. Or I can go and do that World Quest and try and Titan Forge one of these bad boys, and it would do a lot of damage. 24 comments you could see, yeah, about how you could get it. You know, you would try and find it from a World Quest and get this item. So interesting effect. One of the weird things about Titan Forging was the power that would be in these sorts of trinkets that you could go and find. And there's actually a little bit reminiscent to this with some of the new upgrade system kind of creates a little bit of this as well, like the Drogbar Rocks, Drogbar Stones thing. There is some element of like, oh, if there's one of these that I can find on the Adventurer or Champion track or whatever, that would actually be pretty good potentially for me, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, although I do think if they outclass like heroic raid items, then that's bad probably. But if there's like one or two interesting trinkets that are pretty good for you and can last you into that level of content, I think that's pretty nifty. Devilsaur Shock Baton was certainly one of those. So that is my list of trinkets. Let me know which ones I've missed. Again, this list was just from Legion to now. To have, I guess, Legion to Vault of the Incarnates is kind of the range that we were looking at for this one. If you have any cool trinkets that are super memorable to you, Carrot on the Stick from Vanilla, whatever ones you want to mention, go ahead and throw them in the comments below. Or if there's ones that you think I've egregiously snubbed by not including in the Legion to now range, also do put those in the comments below. Or if you hate any of my choices, also welcome the comment. Any comment's going to help me with the algorithm, so even if it's hate, I welcome it. Thanks very much for watching. Remember to subscribe if you enjoyed the content. More coming soon. See you in the next one. Bye.